So we're talking about Bad Bunny today. What's his name? Not his stage name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So his regular name, Benito Martinez, is what he's known by, but Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio is his
Love it.
entire name. Yeah,
Love it. And so have you started trying to learn Spanish yet?
I have.
Oh, good for you.
Jason studied for quite a while, so I haven't. That's my husband, and I think the worst thing I do is I keep showing him that Saturday Night Live skit where they're deciding which gender words are, and it's so funny. And he's like, "That's not learning Spanish. Come on, let's go."
I love it.
So,
That's a
un
start. It's a
poquito, un
start.
poquito. Yeah, he said we have 4 months.
If you've never learned a Latin language, it's really good to get into that gendered language thing. That's
Absolutely.
one of the hardest things to sort out, right?
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention, so we're also gonna talk about Saturn cycles
Yeah.
because like, we had already sort of thought of Saturn cycles, but when you look at everything that's happening and with Bad Bunny and the choices he's making and the stands he's taking, it made me go look at his chart and I realized, oh, he's very just post his Saturn return.
Yeah.
And he's been in our faces, not in a bad way, for quite a while, but we're seeing his evolution and we're seeing who he's becoming through this big Saturn milestone. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm so excited about it.
Me too.
So where do we start? Where are we starting?
Well, let's begin with the Saturn cycle. What do you say?
Sure. Yeah.
Because what we're going to be doing is going back and forth between what the Saturn cycle is asking us to look at and what we know about Bad Bunny.
Excellent. So
So
here,
cool.
this is also a handout. So
Yeah,
once
thank
this
you for putting
actually
this together. That was
the
cool.
recording go my pleasure. I
Mhm.
listen, I love making handouts. It's a bit of an obsession.
It's good.
So this will be in the YouTube video once the recording goes up by tomorrow morning, so you can get a copy of this. And this is just a diagram that shows, it's actually cut off a little bit, so I'm gonna do it a bit differently. Let's try
Oh,
that.
cool.
There we go. Perfect.
Perfect.
So do you want me to talk through this or do you wanna talk through it?
Let me have a go and then you can add to it. The
Cool.
key points we want folks to take away from this are the Saturn cycle is primarily brought up in astrology when you're hitting your 29th year, which is when Saturn comes back to the position it was in at the time of your birth. But what this shows is that there are significant inputs from Saturn at different periods of your life at 7 years roughly. And so the first square to Saturn is at 7 years old. The opposition comes at 14, 15. The first or the second square, rather, for the first go round is at 20, 21, and then it comes back at 29. And so we dug into Bad Bunny's, past and what we can find about him online and mapped his experiences to this to describe to us more about his chart. And in part, that's because we didn't get a time for his birth. So we know a lot about his planets, a lot about his aspects, and of course, about this important transit. And then the other piece is like, we can't escape Saturn, even if we wanted to. Look, it's following us around,
It's so
following us
true.
around.
So
Right.
true. Well, and the fact that it follows the same, almost like a very similar timing to our progressed moon,
Right.
there is this on two levels from the outer world transiting Saturn and from our inner world, the progressed moon, this shift that's happening, this growth that's happening inside and outside at the same time. And I,
Yeah.
I wanted to say this so that I remember,
Mhm.
from a traditional perspective, Lisa Scheim has done a lot of work on this and talking about the different from the first Saturn square all the way around. And
Love it.
that's I've seen her. I think I saw the first time I saw her talk about it was at the last UAC.
Nice.
So you can go there and look for that lecture. But yeah, she does a really good talk on the Saturn cycles and all of them, not just the return.
Yeah. That's a
And
good pro tip.
we can return back to this later in the program.
Yeah. Yeah. We can go
I
through and go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, because we're gonna bring up his birth chart, and you mentioned that we
Yeah.
don't have a time.
Mhm.
I mean, the timing is so beautiful because last week we talked about if you don't have a birth time. So this, we're gonna get to kind of show you how we walk through when we don't have a birth time with somebody,
Yeah.
and some of the things that we're looking at to give us a time to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
That's
right.
perfect.
So let's keep going.
Yeah, you wanna take a look at his chart now?
Let's do that.
All
And I
right.
kinda like the angle that we were looking at before. I like
Yeah,
this,
that's
right?
perfect.
I
Yeah,
like it.
yeah.
So um, this time actually went in totally by accident when I put
Mhm,
his data into Solar Fire, and I love it because I think it's probably if he is the Aries rising, I think he might be. I think it might
mhm,
be just a little bit earlier than this so that
mhm,
Venus is closer to the ascendant.
mhm.
But can I talk a little bit about
Take
why?
off. I love
Okay.
it.
So the first thing when I was looking at images of him, the one of the things that was striking, other than how pretty he
Mhm.
is how symmetrical he is.
Right.
And usually, because Venus is always looking for balance, right? She loves the symmetry, the balance. Um, Often, when you have that level of symmetry, there's some kind of a connection with Venus
Mhm.
to the ascendant, because the
Yes,
ascendant is a big part of how we look, right? Our
yes.
appearance. But what was so interesting to me was one of the very first images that popped up was he was just covered in piercings, and it was a
Oh,
very Martian
wow.
image. And
Yeah.
I was just like, "Oh, that's like," so there's also gotta be some kind of a Martian connection to the
Yeah,
ascendant with the,
100%.
the piercing is a very Martian thing. Tattoos are a very Martian thing.
Yeah.
And the image was him not wearing a lot of clothing and a
Mhm.
lot of piercings, and so you saw the tattoos and the piercings,
Right.
and it's like there's a big Mars connection there. So I like this Aries rising
Mhm.
for him, but we don't know. This is all just
We don't, and so there are 2 techniques that I've seen predominantly. One is you cast it for noon, or the other is you cast it for an Aries rising. Usually it's 0, but I love what this has done because it shows you, what you can get and what you can't get. So if we had his ascendant, that would give us the ruler of his chart, which we would look at through every other filter, right? We go back to the ruler. It would give us the houses where these events are happening. And as we went through the rectification, I looked at Wendy Stacy's video. It was really cool. And there was a general vibe of like, get the 2 hour window for the ascendant. And it's because especially when we're talking about how you intersect with the world, we want to know what your ascendant is. But the first thing right off the bat that folks see is the Pisces Sun, Saturn, and Mars. And I see that you put that moon in Aquarius. He has that unique capacity or the unique opportunity where we can't tell if his moon is in Aquarius or Pisces. But there's a
yeah.
cool story for each. So,
Well, and he has planets in each. So
yes.
he's got the energy of both of those signs. So that
Mhm.
makes it trickier to go, what sign is this moon in?
That's
But
something.
what were you thinking about touching on right there?
Well, just that even if it's in Aquarius, it's ruled by Saturn, and the Saturn's in Pisces. And so it's just this reconfirming of this Pisces vibe. But like we've talked about with any cusp, it's a really different experience to have a Pisces moon where you're just picking up all that information, or an Aquarius moon where you're asked to find out what genuinely is coming up for you, and it may be detached, or there may be different intellectualizing rather than emotionalizing. But the goal is to actually be authentic with your emotions and not fall for, you should feel this way, you should feel that way. So to me, it's kind of, there are some of his um, endeavors that are like wickedly clever. And in a way, I feel that Aquarius, and I feel like the emotional impact comes from that moon. So I think it's cool that it kind of circles around. And I think it's cool that it's kind of different. I don't know how cunning he'd be with a Pisces moon. I mean, maybe we talked about Sam a little bit in our prep.
I mean, he does have a Jupiter in Scorpio, which is ruled by a Mercury in Aquarius. So, I mean,
Mhm.
he gets there anyways, even with
Right,
a Pisces moon, right? I don't know,
right.
it's he really does. He has, like, this is such a perfect chart for some of the stuff that we talked about last week, where it's
Yeah.
like, well, you might not know the moon and you know what I mean? So,
Yeah, yeah, it's a
kind of
great
cool.
example.
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
looked up that Pluto on the North Node. In EA, it's the North Node is kind of the car you drive in, not the North Node. The nodes are kind of how you express or the function and what house they live in and so on and so forth. But with Pluto conjunct, my personal sense is you have a Pluto is kind of the experience of what God or the great mystery wants us to do. So it's not personal and it could be really intense. With the North Node, which you may or may not feel, depending on the aspects to it, which we're going to talk about a bit, um, the Pluto being on the North Node conveys a lot of power. So that could actually be the marshaling force that I'm feeling from him because he kind of like my sense of him is he showed up into the right family who could help plug him into devotion, which a Pisces needs to get some sense of judgment. We don't know his time, so we don't know if his Jupiter is above the horizon or below the horizon to talk about him wanting to do good, but it's obvious that he wants to do good. It's a fascinating chart, and he's a fascinating guy. The last thing I'll say, which is totally not node related, but I want to get it in there really quick, is this push me, pull you vibe of his balsamic sun moon phase and his new Mars Venus phase. So, in who he is, he's kind of been there, done that. But in what he wants, it's like, ooh, that yummy Venus and Aries, like very sexy and of the moment kind of vibe.
Right, right, right. I love it. Well, and before we move on, should we look at the Aries rising images just and then we can talk about the
Please.
planet?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
let's
that's great.
that's still a bit fresh in
Back
people's
to
minds.
the ascendant because we want
Yeah,
to
so
see
back
how
to
he looks.
the argument for
Yes.
the Aries ascendant. There are some images that really struck me. So this, let's
Oof.
figure out our isn't he just so
Oh
I love
man.
this. This is from his Instagram account, and I was like, yeah, there's the strong Mars energy is
Yeah.
undeniable, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder if we can make this one a little bit bigger. Um, nope, that
Yeah.
didn't do it. There we go.
Yeah.
So this Lillian had found an image of him as a child, and it's in our beautiful PowerPoint, but I could not get over his mouth. Well, I'm a lip girl, but the shape of his upper lip is literally the Aries symbol, you
Yeah.
know? And the fact that he has Venus in Aries is gonna impact that a little bit, but
Yeah.
I just thought, like Sarah Michelle Gellar, her eyes and her eyebrow shape with her Aries
Oh,
energy makes the Aries symbol. So it's interesting whenever the Aries is attached to the ascendant, you can actually
mhm.
see that sometimes in the bone structure, sometimes in the facial shape, whatever. But yeah, I just wanted to show that
Oh, I
before
love
we
that.
moved on. Yeah. So let's look at it back to his chart and keep going with what we were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, so Pluto being next to the North Node conveys a lot of energy towards his goals, energy towards what he wants to grow into. And then the other two things we noticed were that the Mercury and the Moon are a skip step, which means they are square to the nodes, which in evolutionary astrology suggests that there's either mastery or you have to kind of skip step, come back and finish the last part of a lesson. And so, with that Mercury focus, it's really interesting to me that he wants folks to speak Spanish, that he's not trying. His mom is an English teacher, right? He didn't grow up with this inability to understand or get exposure to how to pronounce English or how to speak English. He has chosen this. And there's something too about that opposition to Chiron from the Saturn and Mars that like starts to talk about wanting to kind of root for the underdog, or really understanding what life feels like with a lot of obstacles. So, anyway, the skip step to me really talks about how he moves through life. And later, when we looked at the Saturn return, they were in a trine and a sextile instead. And so, as these natal aspects are affected by time, you can also see where there's more fluidity or more emphasis.
Yeah, yep. One of the things that really struck me too in everything that he has going on right now, and to your point about the speaking Spanish and
Mhm.
that energy, what struck me was that the Saturn in Pisces connected to his Saturn return, and
Yeah.
what Sam said about Pisces energy meaning to
Yes.
teach people a lesson, and it's very much like we're seeing that right now in a really big way, like I'll do this, but I won't do this. And I won't do this unless you do this. Like that's so like there's lessons to teach and I'm here to teach them to you.
Absolutely.
'Cause
You
I
really
know it's
feel
not
that.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
For
Well,
sure.
let's start going through his timeline. Um, there's if you go back to the Saturn piece, we'll kind of map it to that, and then we'll go deeper into what he's been up to. So, just the quick TLDR version, too long, didn't read. By the time of his first square, when he was 7 years old, Bad Bunny had already been infused with this music, salsa, bamba. His dad's a truck driver and used to take him on the road, and they would listen to music together. And he, at 5 or 6, got to choose his first CD of his own and started singing. And we looked up pictures from his youth of him dancing for his family and singing for his family. And there was this very steady encouragement for him to sing. And so he had decided by the time of his first square that he was going to be a singer. Um, by the time he was 14, he began performing, or he had actually begun to perform in a choir, and he ended up ending that because he was working on so much music of his own. So this is at the opposition, and he started to upload his music to SoundCloud. And at each time when I've seen him in various interviews, it's that the people were so supportive of him and saying, like, yeah, you are that guy. Please keep doing that. So things kind of exploded between the opposition and the second square. At by the time we get to the second square, he had already been signed to a label in Puerto Rico and had won multiple awards. He also started to exhibit more of this passion for his people. And he wrote an anthem after the Hurricane Maria wiped out 3,000 people from this tiny island, and participated in protests to get the mayor replaced because there was corruption there. The awards that he won were the American Music Award for Latin music. And I can't skip over this next part. He fell in love with this beautiful jeweler, Gabriela. I can't remember her last name, so forgive me, but she became kind of his muse and was in his music. And she was in his videos. And there's one, Mi Tita Pregunta, video that he's in that's so gorgeous. And I'd recommend you all go see it because it really captures like how romantic he can be, but also how coarse he can be. Because the entire song, Tita, Mi Pregunta, is my aunt's asking me, do I have a girlfriend? And he's like, of course I have her here and here, and they're beautiful and women. I love them and all of them. And I want new women and all of this stuff. And then in the video, he gets kidnapped by his friends and he ends up going to a wedding. And in the sky is this gorgeous woman, his girlfriend of several years. And she descends from the sky and they end up getting married. And it's just so romantic. And it fits in with this image, right? Of like this rebel who's one with his people, who's speaking the language and really standing up. And he hasn't compromised. He's recorded stuff in Brooklyn. He's traveled all around the world. He's not changing his identity. So then we come to Saturn return. And when we looked at that chart, pardon me, there were a few things that stood out. One was his Venus was square his sun. And in this time, he met Kendall Jenner at a basketball game. His girlfriend of many years, and he broke up, but they were still good friends. And he began this relationship with arguably the most controversially famous family in the United States. And so there was really a lot of uproar about who is this guy? And he had 3 passes of the Saturn return. And on the first pass, he met her, then they dated, they broke up. And then on the 3rd pass, they got back together. But there's a lot more to this story. I just highlight that to show he went from somebody who was known for like just this pure love, right? Even though he was realistic, right? And like, scandalous, to somebody who did something that's completely uh, uncharacteristic. And so I'll add a few more items. When he broke up with his girlfriend before Kendall Jenner, he kissed one of his male dancers at a concert. And
Yeah, I've seen footage of that,
right.
yeah.
And this kind of brings up another point to his fluidity and how he presents himself, which is so exciting with that Venus and Aries. He said, in this he was on the cover of, I think, Spanish Vogue in 2020, and they did a video of him, and he said, sex is bigger than what we think it is, and we shouldn't limit ourselves. And then he said another thing that was really quite gorgeous, which was, and we don't appreciate women enough. And so he doesn't feel that sense of women are less than or beneath him. And that really infuses how he dresses and his style, which we talked a little bit about how that goes back to um, his Saturn in Pisces being like really authentically himself. But in that video that I described, he wore a skirt and poet sleeves. And it's just this beautiful combination of like very masculine, very like clearly masculine, but also like not afraid to embrace the feminine. And there are 2 other things I want to mention before we kind of open up the discussion. One is he also, with his dad, would watch World Wrestling. And in 2020, he also was present. I think he did 3 official fights for the World Wrestling Federation. And again, he came back, and the reception for him was like crazy. I've seen articles that are like, Bad Bunny is the celebrity we didn't expect to resonate with, but he is big in WWE. And I find that to be one of those like secret entrances, especially because it's so important in the manosphere, and it
Mm.
reaches, I'm never going to go see wrestling, you know what I mean? So it reaches an entirely different audience. And then the other thing is films. He started acting in Narcos. And then TV, he's done several TV things, but he was also in Bullet Train and most recently in Happy Gilmore. And I think like the fashion and the film really speaks to this, Renaissance guy. And then I can't end it all unless I say when he became more famous, before he hit that 2nd square, he started his foundation. And what would he call it other than Good Bunny? And so that foundation is still going strong, and they do golfing events and all the kind of stuff that reaches yet another different audience, right? Of like super wealthy people who hang out together. And then also he does a lot for his local town. So he brings musical instruments there and does charity work there.
Can you speak a little bit to what Good Bunny is all about? What are the objectives of his organization?
Absolutely. So he was born outside of San Juan, but still in the municipality. But like many places, it's really rural. in Puerto Rico, and so they moved to a barrio, and they didn't have, a lot. They made do, and they had a really happy family. But he saw what it was like to be oppressed, which I think is part of the Saturn and Pisces. Is kind of, you see everything in a similar way to Virgo, but it's not if it's personalized, it becomes sad. You know what I mean? It's not like, I find with Virgo, if it's personalized, you get to work because you don't want that irritation. But with Pisces, sad. So what he does primarily is provide schools with equipment and resources. And then he also kicked it all off with $100,000 of money from his wallet. So he is very engaged with that. The golfing thing, I think, reflects sort of how he's entering this different world. But those are the three things that they generally do.
I love that. And that speaks so much to having those Aquarius planets or the sign Aquarius on the 11th too.
Yes.
Again, we don't know. Sorry, I won't. Are we still talking about his Saturn
I,
cycles?
I'm all done. I'm all
No,
done.
that's not what I meant. I just don't want to jump ahead. I don't want to
No, no,
cut you
no.
off. I don't want
The
you to admit
thing
you did so much work on this. I do not want to miss
I kept
anything.
it's so funny. I mean, we both kind of hinted at it. He's easy to look at, you know what I mean? And I thought it was so funny to go down a rabbit hole. But yeah, he we're done with the Saturn. I just wanted to kind of frame it and then talk about, we haven't talked about the after, right? Because I think of Saturn as, I'm going to say it in a more productive way, fix it and find out, FAFO, fix it and find out. And so let's talk about this, right? He was in the Super Bowl in 2020, right? Recently was announced to be the headliner for 2026, but he was a guest of J-Lo and Shakira. And as I went through his biography, it was shocking to me how, like, he's not just right place, right time. He's the man of the hour, he's doing all of this amazing stuff. So when I saw that, it really struck me, right? So we've talked a little bit about Saturday Night Live. That's where I first experienced him because I'm
Yeah, me too.
150
Yeah.
million years old. So I'm not doing, reggaeton and all the kind of music. I'm learning. But yeah, so I saw the Shrek one first, and that one was just such a beautiful encapsulation of like how his chart is. He showed up, I'm just going to describe it briefly, and he's already in costume. And when I think of Saturn and Pisces, I think of kind of magical, a little bit in touch with what can happen magically. And so in this thing, he wants to do maybe a Shrek thing, but he's totally neutral the whole time. And he's talking to their comedy team that does videos, and they're like, "What do you want? What do you want?" And he's so neutral that they can't figure it out until he pulls out a completely done script for him doing Shrek for the show and hands it to them. And they're like, "This is already published, like through a publishing agency. How did you do this?" And then they show like he wants them to play these characters, and poof, they turn into these characters. And then at the tail end, when you talk about like Aquarius, right, and unexpected, he's like, "I don't care anymore. I'm moving on." And that is like not just Aquarius, but also the balsamic vibe of, man, I thought that would have a little bigger punch. But that unexpected, good at comedy, good at,
Right, right.
events, invited to the right things, funny. That to me feels like he's starting to collect his reward of doing his Saturn return, however it turned out. And so he just finished a 30-day amazing residency. He was very clear, again, we're talking about authenticity, that he doesn't need to go through America to have the highest rated tour in the world. And he is going to make the Super Bowl the only part of that happens in the United States, which really is that kind of thumb in the eye of that Saturn conjunction opposing Chiron in his chart. But that thing, I think he has a lot further to go. And it does, because I love when people care for their people. The fact that he's gone back to, like, you guys have 4 months to learn Spanish, which is another line from the Saturday Night Live that he hosted most recently. The fact that he's hosted 2 in 2025, there's just like this, incoming opportunity and organization. And of course, we know his Jupiter is in Scorpio, so we know that it's receiving a trine by sign from the exaltation of the Jupiter in Cancer right now, by sign,
Oh,
right?
yeah, 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 for
So
sure,
But
for sure.
but it's nice to see, and it's something that folks need to be aware of, is like Saturn as an organizational element in your chart will help you get traction. And the more you deal with the obligations in your life in a good way, the more you see where that traction is and isn't, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and he is such a great example. And we'll, for the podcast listeners, we'll make sure that these charts are in the comments in
Oh,
case
yeah.
you want to take a look at it. But the thing that, like, he's such a good example of a lot of things. Like when we're talking about not having a birth time and remediating, so many things in his chart are yeah, but. And I
Right.
think, so I'll give you a couple of examples. So I thought, well, Aries rise. No, I'd had there were some things that had come up when you and I were talking about this, and as I was going through images of him,
Yes.
that he is, there's a chameleon-esque vibe about him and an energy that's hard to kind of pin down, and so I had actually thought he has a very Pisces rising vibe as well.
Right.
And and then yeah, but he has a Mars in Pisces, Mars rules Aries, so, it's like, okay, so never mind. And then we were talking about, the romanticism and all of that, and it's like, well, then the moon must be in Pisces. But then you go, okay, but it's a Venus in Aries that is an evening star. And
Right.
evening star energy of Venus is very romantic. Evening star Venus in Aries is much softer than morning
Mhm.
star Venus in Aries.
Mm.
So it's a yeah, but again,
I
in
love that.
terms of what his chart might be about. And so I just thought that was so interesting. Now, when you think about, and we should do an episode on this because I don't know if you've seen the document. No, it's not a documentary. It's an actual movie of
Mm.
the first day of Saturday Night Live and the
Oh,
absolute chaos that it was.
yeah.
And so because it actually did go on the air at exactly midnight on a specific date, there's a chart for it.
Love it.
And a chart that we know the time of
Mhm.
and the location and all the good bits. So it's a very fixed chart,
Mhm.
which you would absolutely have to assume based on the fact that it's been around for 50 years.
Right?
There's going to be a lot of fixity in a chart for that,
Yeah.
but the tension and the squares are wild. And when I look at his Jupiter in Scorpio, there's a fitting there, that there's a resonance. And I want to go back to what you said, when you first saw him on Saturday Night Live. My first, I'll give you my progression. Bad Bunny, what the hell is
Right.
Bad Bunny? Yeah. And then I expected, I think it was actually Karma Chameleon guy who had been on and did a very avant-garde, very different performance, very theatrical. So I was kind of expecting that from Bad Bunny. And so when
Mhm.
he came out and it was very hip hoppy, I was like, oh, okay.
Yes.
Nope, not what I expected at all. And then it just that was my whole vibe the whole time. And just in awe of how serious he is without taking himself seriously, which is the weirdest combination. So that like it doesn't quite connect for me as the other piece about the Pisces
Right.
ascendant. Because it's just like you can't quite peg it.
Right. Right. And then I'm looking at the Jupiter and I don't quite see an aspect, but one of the things that Wendy's lecture went over was I thought it was pretty cool. For the Mercury, you look at how they talk, you know, and I think he does talk like an Aquarius, but he often slides into that little squishy Pisces, which I think is because the moon is so close and Let's say it's in Aquarius, right?
But the ruler is in Pisces,
Exactly. Exactly.
right?
So it's easy peasy. And then he's tall. He's quite tall. He's 6 feet. And so that to me says there's some Jupiter in there. There's some Jupiter aspect, but I don't know for sure. These are just like little samples of what you can find. But yeah, and then the one thing I tend to think of the Pisces and the Virgo is like, gosh, that's painful, don't you know? Gosh, that's like maybe not painful, but you're going to feel it really intensely.
Well, I think there's a few things that took me surprised with his chart.
Yeah.
One of them was how heavy, I don't know that heavy is the right word, but there's a
Right.
lot of healing in this
Yeah.
lifetime in this
Yeah.
chart. And that I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah.
The other thing I expected, because he's such a phenomenon, is more dignity, more obvious dignity.
Right.
And I think I mean, he has Jupiter is in mutual reception with Mars, beautiful.
Trining
What's
the sun,
Venus? Yeah, and
Venus
by
the ruler.
exaltation, Venus, and so like it
Yes.
is there is a lot of dignity, but it needs to cooperate. It needs to collaborate. It needs other things to help it with that
Right.
dignity.
Right.
And what's interesting is when we see like really big stars who have, say, a Jupiter in Pisces or Sag, which is super common,
Mhm.
um, they have like a niche, a thing
Yeah.
they do, a thing they're famous for.
Mhm.
And this not obvious dignity where the planets have to work together really speaks to his variety, to
Yeah.
all of the things he's willing to do, all the things he's willing to try.
Yeah.
And I think that that is, it's cool, and also it speaks to his modest roots
Yes.
because nothing was handed to him,
Right.
and so you don't see that entitlement or
Right.
that expectation that you get with planets in rulership or dignity, you
Mhm.
know? And
Oh,
so I
yeah.
love that as well with this chart. It says a lot about, where he's gonna put his energy and the fact that I think he's completely aware that he can't do this by himself,
Oh, yeah,
you know?
absolutely. One of
Yeah,
one of my favorite parts of listening to his interviews is how devoted he is to his family, or how he says he's devoted to his family, yeah. So he has a story about his mom. The best response he got to his music was his mom crying, right? But at the same time, he says he knew he was going to be big. He knew he wasn't going to be small. And he thinks big and he goes big. And he knew that he was going to be famous. And he knew this even like quite a young age. So to me, when I think about that, potential for oversensitivity with that Pisces, especially with the Virgo Chiron, I think to myself, someone got in there, and you're not showing it here, but I think his sun is conjunct. Oh, you are? No, Pallas Athena. I think his
Oh,
sun
no, I
is
don't have
conjunct.
any asteroids on here.
That's
Oh, I
okay.
love that. Oh
Right?
gosh, we can do a whole Palace episode. How
Exactly.
fun would that be?
So
Yes.
he talks about his mom in a way where she modeled the devotion he would need with that Pisces kind of vibe, because it's not the same as go out there and be a cutthroat asshole. You're going to feel everything you do to other people. And that's kind of the piece that I think about when I think about where Pisces sits in the mafia, because I'm confident there's a bunch of Piscean karma deliverers who are then, hung out to dry, because whatever you put out comes back to you 3 times. And unless you learn to like unhook from that entire process and just accept that feelings come through and there's no blame, and revenge is a myth and all these things, you're stuck with that stuff. So it's cool in a way that he acted it out. His position in Bullet Train was the only word he said in English that I could hear was revenge. So it was perfect for that kind of like, tumultuous relationship. But to me, having that Pallas Athena by all of that Pisces said someone showed him how to plug into this in a way that nourishes him. And then he would say what he wants to do when he's in Puerto Rico is be at home. with his family. That's all he wants. And so that says maybe there's some fourth house influence. But what it says to me is he's plugging into the actual source for himself.
I love that. Listening to you and having this part of the conversation has convinced me that I think he has Pisces rising.
I love that. But this is the whole thing, right? Because I have friends who are in their 80s and we say, so you don't have a time for your birth, but we decided, remember, there's this, and this. And it's just the truth of these things,
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because that grandness, the knowledge that he was here for something bigger, that to me speaks to Jupiter ruling the ascendant.
Yes.
That is the expansion of your connection to the world, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
And he's
that's really
bringing his family along with him in a really beautiful way, right? They get
right.
they get all the accolades, but they don't have to do anything else. There's one other angle that I forgot to bring up about his endorsements, right? So he
Right.
has done a bunch of things, but he was a skater boy when he was little. And so the thing that I think are the coolest are his Adidas shoes. He's got just shoes in a million different colors and they're all super vibrant and really beautiful. And then the most recent was the Calvin Klein ads. And I saw them and I was like, whew, sir, this is an Arby's. Get out of here
Yeah.
in your underpants. But it's
Yeah.
interesting, right? To kind of think about, he chose a creative role, right? I don't know
Right.
how much he does for his sneakers, but boy, if you're into sneakers, you're in deep. Um,
Yeah.
so that's another angle.
Well, and so I just want to make one last comment about his chart in terms
Yeah.
of him being a really good example of something. And you and I touched on this yesterday, that he still has such a thick accent. And
Yes.
I'm always quite mesmerized by that as somebody who's very mutable and has a
Same.
cardinal Mercury. I go to places where somebody, when their English has an accent to it, and I pick it up. Like I
Yeah.
can't help it. But when people have come from a second language and their accent just sticks, it just never gets less. Mercury's fixed. And so to see
I
his
love
Mercury in
that.
Aquarius in a fixed sign, and next time somebody says to me, Aquarius isn't a fixed sign, this is an excellent example, right?
It really
Because it's like,
is.
he's always going to talk like that. A fixed Mercury is going to have a way it speaks and it's
Oh,
not going to shift out of that. So I love that. So he's a great example of that. He's a great example of the yeah, but like we talked about. And he's also a really good example of look at the planet that rules the thing that you're looking at, because because everything's working in more of a mutual reception and an elemental way.
mhm.
It is really, he's a great example of the thing that you think might be true is happening from that ruling planet, not from the planet itself.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm gonna go back to just you and me. Let's talk
Yeah.
a little bit. Do we wanna go back to the Saturn model, or do we just wanna talk about
Let's
Saturn
just talk.
cycle?
Let's just talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I want to say upfront when it comes to Saturn is that when we say, you'll hear people say first Saturn return, and that is at between 28 and 30. Well, that's not true, and that's not true for him because he is a Saturn retrograde. So if you are born with Saturn retrograde in your natal chart, your first Saturn return is in infancy.
Yes.
And so if you have Saturn retrograde natally, the way I see this and how I've seen it with clients and how I see it in my own chart is that because Saturn comes and has that conversation very
Very early.
early,
Yeah.
the tendency is to take on the responsibility. The
Right.
tendency is to be a grown up in a little child's body, which we see with him. He's again another great
100%.
example of that because
Yes.
you talked about his cycle and he's already knows what he wants to do at 7, and by
You
14
can
he's
see it.
taken control and done it, right?
Yeah.
And so the Saturn return then at 29, or it's so here's the other thing. if Saturn is retrograde in the birth chart, it's going to be a later Saturn return
Right.
because it's going to take longer to move forward, right?
Exactly.
So it's interesting because the Saturn return is usually quite different for somebody
Mhm.
with a Saturn retrograde. It's not as intense because they've already done it. Like in
Right.
an unconscious, you've already done it. It's part of your
I like
unconscious
that.
reality.
I like that a lot, and,
Mhm.
it's interesting, he had a whole bunch of celebrities come join him at that residence, in Puerto Rico, and one of them was LeBron James, and I've looked at LeBron James's chart, and he has Saturn on the south node, and if you know his story, he got ushered through, like, his mom, but he was scooped up by his coach, his basketball coach. He was put in an environment where they were ironing out all of his peculiarities. They loved him. He brought everyone with him. He's still working with people who he knew as a kid. And when I first looked at his chart, knowing those details, I was like, this guy is doing it again. But I very much had that sense of what you described. And he started when he was too young, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I often when I have clients with Saturn retrograde, one of the things that I work in if we're just meeting is your job is to age backwards. Your job is
Nice.
to unlearn all of the restrictions you had to put on yourself when you were little to survive whatever you thought you needed to survive. And I say it that way because um, some people have very serious beginnings and they
Right.
have to grow up fast.
Yes.
But I've had clients, and I know people personally who have a Saturn retrograde who did not,
Right.
and yet still carry the weight
They
of
feel it.
Saturn.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's fascinating. It's so fascinating to
It's
me.
so interesting. And, going through the cycle of it, I have Saturn in Pisces as well, so I just had my Saturn return. And that sense of kind of you get emptied out, and different things show up. It's sort of like that, old trope of you move out of your parents' house when you're whatever, 18, and then you're a totally different person while you're trying to figure out who you are, and then you kind of snap back into whoever you're going to be. And the Saturn return is part of that, right? I've heard it described as you are this glass, and your parents have put in what they have, your culture has put in what they have, and you've put in what you have, and now it's overflowing all the time, and you cannot be functional unless you pour some of it out. And that's never going to be a neutral situation, right? That's going to be like, I'm
Yeah,
losing something, but you're losing it to gain functionality, and you're losing it to kind of refocus. And so
right.
maybe when I don't have a judgment about whatever he wants to do romantically, but maybe that touching into the Hollywood vibe of, do I want to be that kind of celebrity was enough for him. And he did that while he was Saturn returning. I don't know. But for my experience, it's really important to know that you can rely on Saturn to get that traction. So coming into the second Saturn return, which is closer to 58 or something, I got to prepare for it. I got to see what was full, and I got to squeal every time something left and take it really personally and watch it go. So it's not the worst transit you could pay attention to if you want your life to be functional. But
Oh,
it's
I mean, well, here's the thing. You can't ignore Saturn transits. You can just pretend they're not happening because
I
you can't
mean,
not feel them.
I love how Rick Levine says Saturn appreciates prior devotion. And so that's like what I would love to untangle is the idea that Saturn's not an ally, or that Saturn's doing something to hurt you. I don't think that's the case at all. I think Saturn's very much an ally and is trying to kind of point you to where your functionality is. My husband keeps saying this to me all the time because I've had rocky relationships in the last couple of years. He goes, go with a caravan that's going your way. Like, why are you trying to go away that's not your way? And I
I
feel
love
like
that.
that's part of what Saturn's asking us to do. Who do you have, like, think of a caravan. Do you have music Do you have food? What do you have to offer? What are you bringing? What's going to happen when you get there? Go with the one that's going your way. That opens up the door to a ton of insights. But
Yeah.
going the other way, you become somebody that's not you.
Well, and I want to go back. I absolutely love that. That's a beautiful analogy, and I probably am going to use it. I
Yeah.
need to remember though where it came. Try really
Oh,
hard to remember where they came from.
Laura did the cup one.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Overfull. Laura Nalbandian.
Ah, um, yeah, she's got some great Saturn
Whew.
insights. I love that. Yeah, for sure. So I want to go back to the ally Saturn piece because one of the things that's tricky with this revitalization of Hellenistic and more traditional astrologies. They were all born out of a time when
Yeah.
people didn't have a lot of choices, and
Right.
they were stuck often in the positions that they were born into.
Absolutely.
And when hard times came, they were freaking hard times
Yeah.
because it was life or death. People didn't live long, that kind of thing. Um, but now that we're at a time where we have a lot more choices and we have more knowledge, we have more access to knowledge, we have more access to resources and supports. And although some people are trying to get us back to a caste system, not mentioning any names, we are not, and we have choices, and we can move forward in a
Yeah.
different way. And so Saturn is an ally.
Right.
Saturn is not fun. It's
Right.
not meant to be
Yeah.
fun,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Only Capricorns think Saturn stuff is fun, and that's
Mhm.
okay. Good
It
for
is
you.
okay.
We need
It
you.
is
We
okay.
need people to think it's good and great and has to be done. Um, but Saturn isn't meant to be fun, but we can't do anything without it. Like, it's our structures,
Right.
it's our systems, it's all those things, right?
And
And
it's what
so
you bring. It's how you engage with the world. And we're not here to be, despite the most contemporary first world problems, consumers or to be entertained. We're here to experience this body, and Saturn will get you right in there. It's good.
yeah. When I talk about Saturn, and I have a lecture that's called Stop Blaming Saturn,
Mhm.
and it was born out of the demonization of the Saturn return, which happened quite loudly on the internet when we were having the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Because there's a huge generation of people who were born with that. And
Yeah.
so that sort of drove the conversation
Okay.
leading up to that conjunction and
Mhm.
actually brought the Saturn return for that generation into the mainstream media, to the
Yeah.
point where, like, every time you watched I was watching Parks and Rec, and
Yeah.
one of the characters says, "Oh, it's because you're having your Saturn return, and every 20," and she actually explains that every 29 years and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it was, first of all, to not freak people. If you have Saturn retrograde, you've already
Right.
been through it in infancy at
That's
30.
super helpful. Yeah.
You've already done it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there are things that make the Saturn return. You can't generalize it
That's
to the
such
point
a
of
good note. And I will
fear.
say, when I looked at Bad Bunny's chart with Jason, he went, "Oh, if that moon's a few degrees into Pisces, it's besieged," which is, when you're talking about Hellenistic, right? You're talking
Yeah.
about, like you're saying, if you're not able to make it down the street, which tragically is happening more and more all around the US, without getting scooped up or have some terrible thing happen to you, you need to see where that's going to land, right? You need to, because then you can do something about it. The remediation is knowing that this is existing, right? And the notion of Mars, malefics and benefics, sorry, in general, makes it seem as though having a benefic is a good thing that will yield good results. And, we often talk about Jupiter, and then the example of Jupiter not being a benefic is Cancer. Jupiter assists growth. We don't want Cancer to grow. So there are always situations where something that is described to you as positive is not positive, and you got to be aware of that. There's a Terry Pratchett story that's so funny. It's about this little girl who wants to learn something, and so she's gathered eggs and carrots to bring to the teachers, and that's what they pay them in. And the teacher says, do you want some advice from me for free?" And she says, yes, how much does it cost? And she goes, I said free. And she said, my father told me long ago that if it's free, there's a bigger cost. And I think that, having that savvy of like things aren't what they appear to be is important. So, like you're saying, the assignation of Saturn is strictly negative in your life is abdicating this entire realm of growth that happens from pruning, pairing, maturing, digesting. And there's simply no need to look at it that way.
Let's talk a little bit about the cycles of Saturn. And because it is generally about every, how's that?
That's perfect.
28. So since it's about every 28 years that it goes, starts at one point and comes back to that point, it's about a 7-year breakdown, right? I mean, you could break it down into its smaller bits. And I think actually in Aaron Sullivan's Saturn
Mhm.
book, I think she actually breaks it down into even smaller pieces, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly. But we have birth, and then now this is only this smooth and perfect if you don't have Saturn retrograde, because
Exactly.
that, Saturn actually, if you're born with Saturn retrograde, I don't know if, can you see my mouse if I put it on the screen or no?
Mm-mm.
Probably not. Hey, so in the image that's on the screen, we're going downwards, we're going counterclockwise around the circle.
Mhm.
But if you're born with Saturn retrograde, the Saturn is actually going to transit upwards first before it
Right.
comes back down and meets itself and then goes all the way around. But it'll still retrograde as it goes all the way around. So we look at this from the birth point of view, and then maybe sometime, I actually had a client who had a Saturn retrograde days, the first pass days after his birth.
Mhm.
And he ended up with technically a 4 pass Saturn return before
Mm.
he was 14 months.
Wow.
So, not everybody's Saturn story is the same, and
Right.
some people's are like quite intense. And then we cruise through from that point on, and we get to the Saturn square around 7 years old. And um, it's interesting when you listen to people talk about their childhoods, because, and I've caught myself do this, when you ask them about a significant point in their childhood, it almost always happens at or just after this first Saturn square.
Mm.
But the kind of cool thing about it is that I find people, and I do this myself, is if I say to you, what's a significant thing that happened in your childhood that was challenging, and you tell me what it is, and then I ask you what age, you're likely to say around 7
Right.
or 8, right? And so and even if that's not when it happened, which is what happened to me, I realized, oh, that was like I was in grade 6 when that happened. But
Mm.
yet in my mind, I was 7 or 8, because that is, I mean, we hold that as a challenging time in ourselves,
Mhm.
right? If
Yeah.
we had a challenging thing that happened at that time. So there is, and that's what Lisa talks about. She talks about how there's these like significant life events that happen at these hard aspects
Yeah.
that have a very long cycle that will follow for the entire Saturn cycle.
Yeah. And we see them because they're in life. This could be an
Absolutely.
interior process, but it is most definitely an exterior process.
Well, yeah, and that's an excellent observation, or fact to bring up, because I think that sometimes people forget when we're talking about transits. Transits are what happening right now in the here thing, right? And so they are what are going to create life events,
Exactly.
unless there's something we're not integrating in our chart, in our own natal chart, and then we might create an event out of a progression.
Right.
You know what I mean? But
Absolutely.
transits are usually where the life events come from. So often these cycles on the Saturn image will be paired with some kind of an event for sure. And then the opposition. So an opening square is almost like, okay, so here's a challenge in this thing that started at the beginning of this cycle. Here's the challenge. Make adjustments. What do you want to move forward with? What do you want to leave behind? you're creating the structure at the opening square, right? And it doesn't matter which two planets we're talking about. It doesn't matter if we're talking the natal square, anything. These cycles play out. They're all similar. The opposition now is we get to see clearly what we've created. And now we decide how we want to move forward from that because we can see it from that vantage point. And with Saturn, that happens right, as we enter high school,
Right.
we start going. And the other thing I wanted to make sure got said was that these Saturn aspects in the cycle mark very significant points in how we want to grow and mature. So that's another reason why the events happen is they sort of, if we're not moving forward in the way that we're meant to, then life is going to throw something at us that forces us to make that growth and grow up. Yeah. Would you say that's true?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I would
I
also say there's the chart of your Saturn return or your Saturn opposition or square tells you the environment and whether or not there are resources there or whether you'll have to navigate to your resources.
right. I love that. Yeah, that's really true. hmm Um, I had a thought and it left, so
Oh,
let's move
shoot.
on to the
Okay.
no, that's okay. It was in general, it was right in reaction to what you said, but I can't think. So then we've got the closing square. And again, in any cycle, it's this a similar energy where we're going to take the best out of everything that we have done from the beginning of the cycle, and we're going to keep that, and we're going to reinvent it if it needs to be. This is where if you've started a business, you might rebrand at this point. You're not
Mhm.
changing anything fundamental. You're
Right.
not changing the structure. You're not changing the significant pieces of it, but you're going to create it's now coming to its fullness and its full maturity. So now you're really, really breaking it down into what it was meant to be at
Mhm.
this point. And with Saturn, because part of Saturn signatures is letting go of things that aren't aren't supporting, right, from that
Yeah.
Saturnian practical place. And so this can be even more difficult than the return can be because there is a release at this point. And if you're not letting go of the things that need to be released and changed, the event at this point, because there's a bit of that anxiety that the cycle is coming to an end. We're in the home stretch.
And almost impatience, right?
Yeah.
Like with that second square, it feels like, I often have said it's like you expect a ticker tape parade, but the part of the process is you dismantle everything and put it away. And some of the things you're going to toss. And so, again, if you think of that emotionally and those things as metaphors, it can be weighty or it can be like just what you needed.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I there are a ton of factors that play into how Saturn lessons are going to play out for you.
Right.
We've just given you basic bare bones information today because we only have so much time.
Yeah.
But these cycles, you can apply these cycles, not these ages, but the energy of the cycle to any transit and any. You can even do this with the moon. It's just going to happen on a faster, more subtle um, scale for sure. But the Saturn cycles, you think about 21, 22. At that point, I mean, we really have structured our lives around the Saturn cycles. If you think about going to school and you think about all those big major things that we decide to do. And
Yeah.
it's like, so we start school in kindergarten, right? But
Yeah.
really, it's just in preparation for that first square. It doesn't really get serious until around grade 2.
Yeah.
Grade 1 is setting you up. Grade 1 is setting you up. It's important. It's important for you to get ready. And when we think about that's a good metaphor actually for what you said in that preparation for Saturn, because there's scientific proof. There's research done on the fact that if you have a bad teacher in grade 1, if you did not learn what you needed to learn in grade 1, that is going to be a difficult transition, right?
Exactly.
In school, it's going to carry all the way through school.
Yeah.
That thing that did not that lack of whole education at that point in time. So it's
Exactly.
so fascinating. And you had mentioned too Alex Trenoweth.
Yeah.
It's Growing Pains, I think she talks of. She has
Mhm.
a book called Growing Pains. And remind me what that one's about. I know there's some Saturn pieces
I
in
will
that.
say this, I think her name is pronounced Trenoeth because she went to Wales and said they're finally pronouncing my name right.
Okay.
And the second thing is, yeah, growing pains. So she said, as a teacher, she knew she couldn't look at everyone's chart and didn't want that. But she started to realize that there was, and this is important, there was kind of this 1-2 punch that kept happening. And so she ended up following Saturn around the cycle and then noticed that the kids were easier to work with. And then she fashioned it so that it worked with her chart as well, which is just reasonable. But the Jupiter piece is important because before you have the aspect with Saturn, you have an aspect with Jupiter. And I think of that as like the lucky first time, when you try something for the first time and you're good at it. And then the Saturn is going to require more and it's not as satisfying. And so I have started to kind of do this lub dub in my mind of like processes. Like if you get a first experience and it's Jupiterian, here comes Saturn, you know. So that's what she was focusing on. And I also loved that, as a teacher, her clarifying comment was it was develop confidence. She wants kids to develop confidence. And that's what we're trying to share about this Saturn, that it's not coming to get you, but it is serious. And so preparing and understanding the environment you're in is critical, because if you don't have those resources, you either need to get a team or you need to pace yourself. And one of the things that I keep thinking about is impatience. Like it seems where there's an absence of maturity, and I'm just going to speak for myself, there's an abundance of impatience. And that the processes we share as humans are primarily to kind of cool your jets while things are happening. And so you talked about this and it resonated with me so much, I have to bring it up. I've read book after book on self-help and raising children that have said if you don't get the proper nourishment as a youngin, it does impact you. And as an olden who was raised that way, I can tell you, you just look at different things. You're not in the same path, so you look for the different information. You don't give up or berate yourself or think that you've been cursed. You uncurse the heck out of yourself and make Saturn a friend.
Right, right. The other thing that I like about something that you said made me twig on this. Looking at a cohort like Alex does in Growing Pains is interesting from the retrograde angle because not so much with Saturn, but with Jupiter,
Mhm.
knowing which kids are not in sync with the rest of the group.
Yeah,
Because with like they're not going to go through the same transits, they're going to be a little bit behind.
yeah.
And I know, like, when you read it's Erin Sullivan's book on retrogrades, actually, she talks
Mhm.
about, one of the things about Jupiter retrograde is you might not have the same ideals as your cohort,
Mhm.
or the same beliefs. And there's this awkward, trying to fit in. And often in adulthood, your friends won't be in your same age group, right?
Right.
You're gonna um, migrate to some, people who are more resonant with that. But it's interesting just in terms of cycles. And when you're thinking about a group of kids, then you actually say, oh, well, that makes perfect sense that those
Right.
kids
Then you
wouldn't
get it.
necessarily be in sync, right? Because
Yeah.
they're not going through the same cycle as the rest of their friends are, but they're not going to be alone. There's going to be other kids in that group who have that retrograde. And
Right.
I should say this if anybody doesn't know, the reason why Alex looks at Jupiter and Saturn is that a cohort of students is likely to have, unless the planets are changing signs in the middle of that school year, a cohort is going to have the same Saturn and sign as the rest of the group. I said the whole sentence. And then for Jupiter, it's going to be maybe a combination of two or just one,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. It
I'd be,
narrows it down.
I would be really curious to know if there's a correlation between kids that are either held back or there's a discussion about holding back, and if there is a retrograde connection to that.
I can't recall when I read Alex's book if it was in there, but I'm gonna go check. I
I
got
wouldn't
both of them, so
I wouldn't say that that would be the truth with Saturn because Saturn retrograde has a bit of the opposite effect. Not that they're not in the same cycle, but it kind of brings maturity. So those kids are going to be
it brings
in
that
some
inner
ways ahead of their
authority rather than maturity, I would say, inner authority. And the only reason why is because
Oh,
I
I
get a
like that.
real Cartman vibe from somebody who has inner authority, but it doesn't map to what they're able to provide. And so Cartman's a character on South Park who I do what I want, and he
Yeah.
feels a sense of authority, but it's not mapped to his behaviors.
Yeah, and I could see that with certain signs and certain aspects. And I think maturity was not my right word.
I think it's
I
a
think
great word because it
no,
is like,
not for what I'm trying to say though.
okay,
Like, because I'm trying to say that I'm trying to put something universal on the Saturn retrograde, right? It's more there's a realist
yeah,
piece. Like if Saturn retrograde is retrograde in the chart, there something has happened where you don't get to pretend. There's you don't you see
I
the
I
seriousness
agree.
of life, right?
Yeah.
Whether you decide to mature or not, there's a choice in that. So
And
not
the
every
kernel
situation
of that,
is
I think, is you're trying to cultivate your own authority, and that's the retrograde, I think, expression. And therefore, you're on the prowl for how authority operates. And like you're saying, you don't get to think authority always does something right. You're seeing the flaws because you're
oh yeah,
trying to be motivated to do your own authority. And
right,
all of those things are controversial. They're
right.
not easily accepted by Western
Right. Well, and
communities.
I think that like the part when I think about the connection you made to Cartman and the inner authority piece, if you're a person who, like I mentioned, somebody who's got Saturn retrograde but didn't have anything they had to live up to,
Yeah,
that is what you're talking about.
yeah,
That's how that would manifest to me, right?
right, right.
But you have somebody who did have to grow
Then
up.
you feel that
Yeah.
strength, and
Yeah.
I do think, and I'm not trying to conflate them all, but, like, Saturn in the first is a sense of maturity. You do
Yeah.
have to learn Saturn early on. I do think that Saturn's related to that, but that, there's, the national or the state motto in North Carolina is "Esse quam vidari," which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it right, but it means to be is better than to look like.
Right.
And I love that. But that's not what our society is. To
No, absolutely not.
look like is enough. Maybe
Yeah.
to try is enough. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Lillian. This is
you. This
such
was
and
really fun.
you know what? Thank you for suggesting it because I would not have thought to talk about Bad Bunny.
Right.
And it was a super fun rabbit hole. Had to fit in the dad joke. Love that so much. It was a really fun rabbit hole to go down for
Yay.
sure. So I really appreciate it. And I'll talk about Saturn anytime.